They smiled at me as they handed me the termination letter, and called it redundancy. I never thought that after 10 years of blood, sweat, and deadlines, my name could be erased from the company's roster with a single signature. But there it was, my boss, Armin Kotak, standing in his corner office, pretending he was delivering good news. In reality, he was delivering a nightmare. I'm a deal, and I had built my career from scratch at Phoenix Technologies, a rising star in the city's tech scene. Armin, once a mentor, now felt like a stranger in a sharp suit. He smiled, shook my hand, and muttered, "We appreciate your contributions, but the company is restructuring. Your position is redundant." Redundant. That word burned like acid in my chest. I had poured years into this company, navigated impossible deadlines, and even saved it from major legal troubles with my knowledge of operational licenses. And yet, in a blink, they wanted me gone. The betrayal stung deeper because Armin wasn't just any boss, he was someone I had trusted implicitly. He had praised me in meetings, endorsed me to clients, even joked that I was the backbone of operations. And now, that same man looked at me as if I were disposable. I wanted to ask why, but the polite smile on his face said it all. He knew something I didn't. I left the office quietly, clutching my letter, as whispers trailed behind me. "He's gone," someone muttered. "They say it's redundancy." I could feel their eyes, some sympathetic, some calculating. I realized quickly that no one outside Armin's inner circle had known the truth about the licenses. Only I had access, only I had the operating permit that kept Phoenix Technologies alive under city regulations. And for some reason, Armin had acted as if he didn't care. That's when unease settled in. Something about the timing didn't make sense. A sudden redundancy? Just weeks before a major contract renewal? I replayed every conversation, every casual remark, every compliment he had given me over the years. Were they all lies? Or was this something bigger? Walking past the glass-walled boardroom, I noticed Armin's reflection in the polished surface. He waved at someone behind the doors, laughing. I froze. That laugh, it was too confident. Too calculated. There was a storm coming, and I wasn't sure yet if it was for me or orchestrated by me. What I did know, as I stepped into the rain outside, was this: they thought they had fired me. But the truth, the one thing they didn't know yet, was that I held the only key that kept their empire running. And secrets, as I was about to discover, have a way of turning tables faster than betrayal ever could. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Redundancy. The word echoed in my mind as I walked past the gleaming towers of Phoenix Technologies, a place I had once considered my second home. Even before I was officially gone, the first red flags started appearing. Emails I used to have access to were suddenly rerouted. Documents I once reviewed were signed off without my knowledge. And then came the secret calls, Armin's phone buzzing constantly, conversations whispered behind closed doors. I caught fragments: "Just make sure he's out of the loop," and "Don't let him know until it's too late." My stomach sank. It wasn't just secrecy. There was favoritism too. New hires, barely out of college, were suddenly handed projects I had managed for years. They were praised in meetings, their names on client reports, while my contributions were quietly erased from the records. I realized quickly that my absence wasn't about efficiency, it was about replacing me with people easier to manipulate. Money was another puzzle. I had always handled operational budgets meticulously. But now, decisions were made without any input from me, expenses approved that didn't make sense, contracts signed hastily. The company, which had thrived under my knowledge of permits and licenses, now seemed to be moving recklessly. And yet, everyone else seemed oblivious, or maybe complicit. Even the small gestures I once trusted from Armin now felt tainted. The friendly nods in the hallway, the casual encouragements, they were masks, carefully worn. His smile, once reassuring, now carried a strange sharpness, as if he knew something I didn't. The emotional strain was crushing. I oscillated between disbelief and rage. How could someone I had trusted betray me so completely? The man who had praised me, mentored me, and built the company's operational backbone on my shoulders now acted as if I had never existed. Nights were sleepless, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer and suspicions I couldn't confirm. And yet, buried beneath the confusion and hurt, a sense of unease began to sharpen into something clearer. The timing, the secrecy, the favoritism, it wasn't random. This was deliberate. But why? What was Armin hiding? And what role did I, the supposedly redundant employee, play in the scheme? I started to notice the subtle ways he underestimated me. The documents he assumed I wouldn't notice. The changes he thought I couldn't trace. Every decision he made seemed calculated to blindside me, yet it also gave me glimpses of his plan and its weaknesses. For the first time, fear mingled with a strange clarity. If Armin thought he could push me aside without consequences, he was dangerously mistaken. Something was brewing, and I had no intention of being a pawn any longer. The question wasn't if I would act, it was how. I never expected the truth to hit me like a punch to the gut, cold, precise, and utterly devastating. It started with a casual email from the legal department. All operational permits have been reassigned effective immediately. You no longer hold authority to manage licenses for Phoenix Technologies. I blinked. My heart froze. Every operational license, every permit that had kept the company running legally in the city, was now technically under Armin's name. He had orchestrated my redundancy not just to remove me, but to make me powerless while pretending the company would continue smoothly without me. I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. 10 years of dedication, strategy, and sleepless nights erased in a single maneuver. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. Armin had smiled in my face, praised my work, invited me to high-stakes meetings, and all along had been preparing to strip me of every piece of leverage I had. I remembered the countless times I had stayed late to ensure the company complied with city regulations. I had memorized every clause, every requirement, fought off potential fines and legal nightmares. And now, none of that mattered. Armin had assumed control over the single thing that kept Phoenix Technologies operating. Without the licenses, the company's operations could be halted overnight. Rage replaced disbelief. My hands shook, my mind racing with how he could even conceive of such audacity. How could he fire the backbone of his own business and think no one would notice? Worse, how could he think I wouldn't fight back? But then came the quiet, chilling realization: the town, the board members, even some clients, they didn't know the truth. To them, I had been redundant. To them, Armin was the savior, the decisive leader making tough calls. I had been invisible in the story everyone would tell. Heartbreak and anger collided. I had trusted him. I had believed in him. And he had used that trust as a weapon to dismantle my life piece by piece. Yet, amid the shock, a spark ignited. He had made a critical mistake. He thought I didn't know how essential the licenses were. He thought I couldn't leverage them. He had underestimated me, the very person whose expertise had built his empire. I clenched my fists, pacing the small apartment I had temporarily moved into. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a challenge. A gauntlet thrown at my feet. And for the first time since that termination letter, clarity emerged. I could strike back. I could expose him, reclaim control, and make him pay for every second of deception. But first, I had to plan. Carefully. Patiently. Strategically. The storm was coming, and I wasn't the one who would be caught off guard. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering like distant stars through the window. The termination letter still lay on the table, next to a stack of legal notices I hadn't yet fully digested. My chest ached, not just with the sting of betrayal, but with the suffocating weight of disbelief. How had Armin, the man I trusted, plotted this behind my back? I thought about all the late nights I had spent ensuring Phoenix Technologies ran smoothly, every license renewed, every compliance box checked. All my work, my dedication, my sacrifices, and he had taken it for granted. Worse, he had attempted to erase me from the story entirely. I let the anger simmer. At first, it was raw and chaotic, a storm threatening to break me. But slowly, it transformed. The chaos became focus. The heartbreak sharpened into clarity. Armin had underestimated me. That was the key. In his arrogance, he had left himself exposed. I realized something important. The licenses he thought he now controlled were still mine. Physically, perhaps, they were reassigned. But knowledge, expertise, and strategic timing couldn't be taken from me. He didn't know that without my understanding, his empire could crumble quietly, efficiently, before anyone realized what had happened. A spark ignited in me, the spark of determination. The fear that had held me captive in those first moments of redundancy dissolved, replaced with purpose. I wasn't just going to survive this betrayal. I was going to turn it into my advantage. I began pacing, mind racing with possibilities. First, gather evidence. Every irregular transfer, every manipulation, every lie Armin had counted on staying hidden, it would be documented, catalogued, weaponized. Second, identify allies. Lawyers, former colleagues, city officials, people who could validate what I knew, who could amplify the impact of my actions. And third, patience. I had to wait for the right moment when his overconfidence would be his undoing. As I clenched my fists, I felt a strange thrill. The fear and hurt that had paralyzed me were gone. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. A player. And every move I made from here on would be calculated, deliberate, and unstoppable. I stared at the termination letter one last time and whispered, "You think you've won. But this is only the beginning." For the first time in weeks, I slept that night not with anxiety, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows they are about to reclaim what was taken. Armin had assumed power, but he had forgotten one thing. The most dangerous person is the one who has nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. The gears of revenge were turning, silently but relentlessly, and I was ready to pull the first lever. The key to defeating Armin wasn't confrontation, it was patience. He thought I was finished, defeated, erased. I decided to let him believe that. Step 1 was documentation. I revisited every email, every approval chain, every compliance report I had ever touched. Phoenix Technologies ran on a fragile legal spine, and I had built it piece by piece. I noticed gaps immediately, licenses renewed late, conditions overlooked, approvals fast-tracked under Armin's name without proper authority. He hadn't replaced me, he had rushed past me. I began organizing everything, screenshots, timestamps, recorded calls where he casually dismissed minor regulatory issues. I didn't react. I observed. Every careless move he made became another brick in the case against him. Step 2 was confirmation. I reached out, quietly, to a former compliance officer at the city licensing board. Someone who still owed me a favor from years ago. Over coffee, I learned the truth. The operating license Phoenix depended on was non-transferable without a technical review led by a certified compliance manager. Me. Armin had signed documents he didn't fully understand. On paper, he looked in control. In reality, the company was operating on borrowed time. Step 3 was the trap. I learned Phoenix was days away from finalizing its largest contract yet, one that required full regulatory verification. Armin was celebrating already, boasting in meetings, promising investors explosive growth. He never suspected the foundation beneath him was hollow. So I waited. I let him believe the lie that mattered most, that I was irrelevant. I declined interviews, ignored calls from HR, stayed silent while he strutted through the office, convinced the storm had passed. Behind the scenes, I contacted a lawyer specializing in corporate compliance violations. I handed over everything: evidence, timelines, proof of negligence. His reaction told me all I needed to know. "This isn't just wrongful termination," he said quietly. "This is operational fraud." The tension tightened like a wire pulled to its limit. All it needed was pressure. And pressure was coming, automatically. Regulators didn't need anger. They needed facts. And facts were relentless. Armin still felt like a king. Still believed firing me had solved his problem. Still laughed in board meetings, confident the redundancy story had buried me. What he didn't know was that the license he thought he owned wasn't just missing paperwork, it was invalid. And when the audit hit, it wouldn't knock. It would tear the doors off. I closed my laptop, heart steady, mind clear. The plan was in motion now. No turning back. He fired me thinking I was expendable. Soon, he'd learn that removing the foundation doesn't weaken the builder, it collapses the building. The morning of the audit felt like standing on a cliff, the city skyline sprawling below as if holding its breath. Armin arrived at Phoenix Technologies in his tailored suit, hair perfectly combed, smile practiced. He had no idea what was coming, or rather, he thought he did. The first signs of panic came when regulators began reviewing the licenses. Armin's confident assurances collided with cold, hard evidence. I had prepared everything meticulously: my documentation, my correspondence, my recordings of him bypassing protocol. One by one, his lies unraveled in front of the auditors, who leaned forward, disbelief etching their faces. "This permit is invalid," the lead officer announced. "And this contract cannot proceed under current compliance standards." Armin's smile faltered. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. "There must be a mistake," he stammered, voice tight. "I've signed everything properly." "On paper, yes," I said, stepping forward for the first time in weeks. My voice was calm, but the authority behind it cut sharper than any sword. "But these operations require technical certification, certification I hold exclusively. You cannot transfer them. You cannot authorize them without my oversight. And yet, you pretended otherwise, putting the company and investors at risk." The room went silent. Board members' eyes widened. Employees whispered. Investors exchanged horrified glances. Armin turned red, fumbling for words. You manipulated the facts." I smiled slightly. "No, Armin. You did. You fired me thinking I was redundant. You signed off on licenses and permits you didn't understand, believing the company was yours to control. And now the truth is public. All contracts pending your authorization are suspended. Every misstep, every oversight, every reckless decision is on record." Within hours, media outlets caught wind. Investors pulled back, clients froze deals, and Phoenix Technologies stock took a nosedive. Armin was humiliated in the press. The man who once smiled with such arrogance now faced a storm of scrutiny, his reputation shattered. The board convened an emergency session. Armin was asked to resign immediately while regulators launched a full investigation. His carefully cultivated empire crumbled in real time. He had fired me to consolidate power, but in doing so, he handed me the leverage I needed to destroy him completely. As he exited the office for the last time, flanked by lawyers and security, his eyes found mine. I held his gaze calmly. "You underestimated me," I said quietly. "That was your first mistake. And it cost you everything." He had assumed victory, but the one who appeared powerless had orchestrated his downfall. Armin had fired me for redundancy, but in truth, He had fired the person who held the only key to keep his empire alive, and I had the courage and knowledge to turn it all against him. The empire he thought he controlled was gone. And I walked away, not just vindicated, but unstoppable. The city felt different after that day. The headlines no longer celebrated Armin Kotak's cunning, they exposed it. Investors demanded accountability, the board replaced him, and Phoenix Technologies teetered on the edge of rebuilding under legitimate leadership. But the most satisfying part wasn't the chaos, it was the calm certainty I felt. I returned to my office, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. The licenses, the very instruments of Armin's deception, were back under my control. Not as a tool of power, but as a shield to ensure the company could survive, properly and honestly. I had not just reclaimed my position, I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and the respect that had always been mine. Colleagues approached cautiously at first, uncertain if I had changed or if I still carried the weight of betrayal. But I held my head high. I did what needed to be done, I said simply. No bravado, just the quiet strength of someone who had stared down deceit and emerged stronger. The same people who had once whispered doubts now nodded with admiration, some even quietly thanking me for exposing the truth. As for Armin, he disappeared from the boardroom, the offices, and the headlines. His empire of lies was dismantled, and the man who had once smiled so arrogantly at my redundancy was now a cautionary tale whispered in corridors. The very act he believed would erase me had, ironically, built the stage for his downfall. And me? I didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. I walked through the empty office late at night, feeling a profound sense of closure. The betrayal that had threatened to break me had instead sharpened me, forged me into someone who could see through deception and act decisively. I often think about that moment when Armin handed me the termination letter with that smug smile. He thought he had won. He thought he had removed a threat. But the universe has its own sense of justice, and sometimes, it delivers it quietly, precisely, and spectacularly. To those watching, I have a question. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Felt the sting of unfairness so deep it seemed impossible to recover? Share your story in the comments, I want to hear how you faced the storm. And if you believe that patience, strategy, and knowledge can turn even the direst betrayal into victory, subscribe to hear more stories of justice served. Because here's the truth I've learned, carved into every step I took to reclaim my life. They fired me thinking I was powerless, but the license I held was the key to their ruin. And sometimes, the most devastating revenge isn't loud, it's the quiet rise of the one who refuses to be erased.